Well, thanks, James. Thanks to Meth for inviting me to be here today. It's a pleasure to see so many people engaged in these really interesting topics. So, as James mentioned, I have a presentation on conversational commerce. Um, so, we're looking at the sort of near term perspective in terms of 2024, but also looking longer term. And I think we will see some really interesting longer term shifts within this market. Um, what James mentioned as well, my background, I am, of course, more on the fintech and payments side. But I think as we're looking at conversational commerce journeys and the user experience, that has to more closely reflect payment preferences and different payment methods in different markets. So the payments aspect of this is something that's very important, and we're seeing a lot of interest in at the moment, as well as the rest of conversational commerce. So, to very quickly talk through the agenda. So, we're going to start by introducing the market and looking at the different channels within conversational commerce. Then, we're going to look at what the current market status is. And then, we're going to deep dive into some of the different payment types and what that payments aspect of conversational commerce looks like, hopefully, giving you something a bit different. Then, it's in the events name, so we had to get something in there. The importance of omnichannel in many senses within conversational commerce. Looking at some key trends to watch, key challenges, and then finishing up with an outlook and some takeaways. Of course, any questions as well at the end, we'll be happy to take those. Just don't ask me what all those acronyms in telco are. So, as anyone who has previously seen one of our presentations, we tend to start with a definition. And I think we've already seen this morning how important definitions are to markets. It's difficult sometimes to actually make sure you're speaking the same language when it comes to some of these topics. So that's why we started with this. So we define conversational commerce as the process by which end users of conversational devices, such as smartphones, are able to leverage them for commerce purposes, including retail and banking, through a chat interface. So that's where we're starting in terms of this market. And I think what we're seeing from an introductory standpoint is ultimately this is a market that is flourishing. We're seeing a move towards more conversational trends within commerce. And I think that's for obvious reasons. If you're a brand, then you want to offer a personalized experience. And personalization is one of the most important trends within commerce as it sits today. Now, what can offer a more personalized experience than taking a conversational approach? And that is a really powerful approach when it comes to personalizing and making this user journey better. And I think it's important as well, something that merchants are often talking about and obsessed with for, I think, very valid reasons, is their conversion rate. Doing everything they can to get their conversion rate as high as it can possibly be, changing their payments mix and their acceptance strategy, changing the channels they advertise in or converse in with their customers. So engaging in real-time conversation with customers can increase that conversion rate. And this can give consumers greater confidence to actually make purchase decisions. And we can see to the right a potential sort of scenario we've mocked up in our lovely Juniper purple. But this is sort of just one example of how conversational commerce can be used in practice. So let's have a look at the different channels. So let's start with web-based and app-based chatbots. And I think this ties in nicely to something that I'm sure you've already heard a lot about and will continue to hear a lot more about. But large language models, I think, will have a huge impact in how chatbots are delivered and how effective they are in the marketplace. We've all had the problems with chatbots. when you, for me recently, it was my car insurance. I changed my car and I was trying to tell them that I'd done so. You would not believe what the chatbot had me answering. And I think this is sort of a problem that there has been with chatbots over time. But with the rise of solutions such as generative AI and large language models, this delivers promise of actually making what can be quite a difficult process a lot more compelling. And again, this can have the impact of actually increasing the conversion within that commerce journey, which is the ultimate objective from that merchant point of view. And if we're looking at OTT messaging as well, this is something we heard about in the previous session that is sort of becoming very important. We've seen services like WhatsApp make a lot of progress in terms of conversational journeys and conversational commerce, particularly within emerging markets. So that's something we think will be increasingly important going forward, particularly as that aligns pretty well with trends like social commerce we're seeing with more sales through Instagram or TikTok or those different types of channels that we're seeing a lot of activity through. And RCS messaging, this is something, of course, that the market is talking about a lot, particularly in light of the recent Apple announcement. So I think that changes the market and gives real potential for RCS to have a really major role to play within this market. I don't need to talk to this audience about all the great benefits RCS has. But I think in terms of conversational commerce, that is a really important step to unlocking a much better conversational commerce experience and really making this work in a really effective way. And the last of the channels we've got here is voice assistants. And this is still a conversational interface. I mean, asking Alexa for something. This is sort of become ingrained in how we operate day to day. Is something a lot of us do. In terms of conversational commerce, it's still not necessarily that popular because it is a difficult format to actually have a conversation within and sort of make that purchase selection. I think that can be quite difficult. So this is a little bit uncommon, but you do still see this happening in some cases, particularly as you have smart speakers that have screens where you can confirm what you're actually purchasing and those kinds of elements. So all of these channels, I think, are important going forward. So looking at the market status, we are seeing that conversational commerce is particularly useful within retail and banking. And this is where customers will benefit the most from a very tailored experience. And this all comes back to personalization, which I started the session with. This is vitally important within this market. For example, in retail, offering personalized recommendations, managing payments that are being made, managing the really complex and often painful returns process through a conversational interface is a very sensible approach. And that's something we see that will really gain traction going forward. And also just using a conversational interface to find out more information about a product, actually enabling that information to be seen and really understanding what the consumer is buying. That's perfect in a conversational interface. So the upshot of all of this is that by 2028, we expect the overall spend across conversational commerce channels, and this is channels that will be attributed to the retail industry, to be more than $47 billion globally. And that will make up 40% of the overall conversational commerce spend. So this is a really significant trend, and I think we'll see a lot more activity in this space going forward. So deep diving a little bit on payments. Now, this is something that I spend a lot of my time looking at, but what you can see in a lot of different markets is that the payment mix is evolving really, really quickly. You had a market that started out in terms of e-commerce, where actually cards were, in a lot of cases, the early enabler of e-commerce. And that was sort of how these markets started. But in a lot of markets, you're seeing that digital wallets are taking a really important role in terms of managing online payments and making online payments. And you're seeing new payment areas opening up. Account to account payments, for example. In Brazil, the rise of Pix, for example, has been massively disruptive to how payments are made and accepted within that market. Open banking within Europe is something that is going to be important going forward. And we've seen recent results of a review of the payments industry in the UK that recommends more use of open banking going forward. And also, direct carrier billing has an important role to play here and has had an important role to play within e-commerce for a good while. So it's important to see the nuance here. Card on file is very popular within North America, but if you're dealing with a global retailer, then if they're working in, for example, Asia Pacific, wallets is such an important part of that. So it requires a nuanced local strategy. If you think of this from a merchant perspective, direct carrier billing is great in terms of its access and its wide reach, but it can be very expensive for a merchant on their side in terms of cost of acceptance. So what we're going to see is that getting payments right is going to be increasingly important, and it's going to involve actually accepting different types of payments and having a really nuanced local strategy. And that will be really important to actually getting this conversational commerce process working as efficiently as it can be. So, as I mentioned, it's in the name of the event. Omnichannel is such a important area. Conversational commerce is all about offering an omnichannel approach. It should be seamless as a checkout process. This can be as simple as making sure that the conversational commerce checkout is actually aware of previous interactions with that customer. Making sure that this is omni-channel and across all the different channels that this retailer or bank or whatever organization it is operates is very, very important to getting this right. This must also be a localized experience, reflecting which of those different channels are popular in the different markets the bank or retailer or whatever it is operating in. And that means that actually partnerships are going to be really, really important to actually getting this all to work correctly and providing a seamless user experience to that end customer. So moving into a couple of trends to watch. Personalization. This is something I've already mentioned because I think it's absolutely vital to the conversational commerce market. We're going to see a lot more efforts within personalization, and this really is the goal for retailers, but also with banks. Offering personalized product recommendations has been something that banks have struggled with for a long time. So it's something they're really focused on making sure that they can actually do really effectively. So using potentially interactive quizzes to gather information, providing personalized suggestions based on this is one way that personalization can be achieved. Creating this feeling of personalization will actually enable greater customer satisfaction, and that comes back to greater conversion, which from that merchant point of view is what they're aiming for. And there are loads of different personalization methods. We're going to see a lot of work on large language models to make sure that this personalization works really effectively. And another key trend, integration with loyalty schemes. This is absolutely massive within the retail and other spaces such as quick service restaurants. Loyalty has been a massive trend within these, and we've seen real redesigns and reboots of loyalty schemes at a lot of the major fast food restaurants, for example. That's something that they've put a lot of effort into. So where conversational channels are becoming more important, tying in with these loyalty schemes will be of real importance to actually making this work. For example, sending messages across OTT platforms, that can help make a loyalty program a lot more engaging for an end user. And that can send rich media that increases their engagement in that loyalty scheme. It could be an offer, it could be a reward. So there's lots of potential there for how to use this omni-channel capabilities. And really, actually, now we have so much competition between loyalty schemes, and I don't know about everyone else in the room, but I seem to have about 20 loyalty schemes on the go at the moment. The key point is differentiation. How do you make that personalized to what that user actually wants? And how do you get someone to use your loyalty rewards and your offers? So getting this to the right customers and offering a sort of personalized experience within loyalty will be really, really important here. Now, onto a couple of challenges. In personal chatbots, and I already talked about my bleak experience with my car insurance recently, but this is something that has been a problem for chatbot deployment, has been that they haven't been overly effective in some use cases. They are seen as impersonal, and that makes it less likely that an end user will actually interact with them. And this is important because personalization has actually been shown to be directly correlated with the purchase price of that sort of purchase involved. So it's essential that customers feel that they actually are having a personalized experience and they are valued as an individual making a purchase. A lot of developments within NLP, for example, will be really important here. Gen AI, large language models, they will all have a role to play within this, and we think we'll see major progress being made here. But vendors must work with the latest AI solutions to actually ensure that they can provide these really effective personalized journeys. And another key challenge is siloed data. This can be a major challenge in particular industries, and I'm thinking banking here is a key one. If data is not shared between different channels and doesn't connect in one place, that's where custom frustration can really creep in. That's where you can have this lack of personalization and this lack of understanding of what interactions have been on other channels, and that leads to customer disengagement with a product or a service or whatever the customer is trying to interact with. So one key point here is that CPaaS platforms do not only centralize outbound communications, but they can leverage customer data platforms to further segment customers for personalization. So there are some key capabilities here that can really make a difference. And I think this just comes back to the importance of omnichannel, getting an experience that actually just works. That's the holy grail. That's something that the industry has been struggling with for a long time. But I think with a lot of technological developments, we're getting closer all the time. And the strongest CPaaS vendors will be competing to see who can facilitate this in the best way. So to wrap up with a market outlook, so I think we've already seen the stat that we expect retail spend via conversational commerce channels to increase to $43 billion by 2028. And that's from 11.4 billion USD in 2023. That's major growth. 280% is a really substantial growth rate that we're forecasting here. We identified that voice channels are potentially an underserved emerging opportunity for vendors. So that's one to watch. There's some opportunities there, particularly as we see greater technological development. And we think that implementing large language model-based conversational services into voice channels is particularly important here. And that cuts across voice assistants, but also contact center as a service platforms to maximize future revenue. So there's some really important elements here. And just on to a couple of key takeaways before I actually pause for breath. So I think one aspect we've already heard about today is the difficulties that we're seeing within SMS pricing. This is a major challenge for the industry. And this is actually, I think, going to lead to more interest in other OTT channels for conversational commerce interactions. Vendors don't want those increased costs. I think that's perfectly reasonable. As we move into sort of the RCS world, this means that operators must offer RCS prices that are actually competitive with SMS in order to increase that RCS support within conversational commerce vendors. And we don't necessarily want that sort of challenge that we've had with SMS pricing to then leak through into RCS and sort of perpetuate that issue. OTT messaging channels are pretty regionally fragmented, so there is a challenge with that aspect. But there are a lot of cases where OTT is more popular than SMS, so that is something to keep an eye on as well. And I think there is a real risk here of operators losing out within the conversational commerce market due to that pricing, and it's something they really need to keep an eye on. And then finally, getting payment strategies right is central to success. Conversational commerce is all about seamlessness. It's all about getting a smooth process end to end. Payments is a crucial part of that. If you get all of the purchase decision right, and then you get to the end of the checkout and it says, I can't actually pay how I want to pay, you've wasted that whole interaction and you've wasted that whole setup. So getting the payments element right is really important. As a result, I think this means we'll see a lot more partnerships between conversational commerce vendors and payments companies, particularly who offer a localized approach in different markets. And I think that will be something really important going forward is that that interaction between the payments element and the conversational commerce element. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. So here comes James.
Any questions from anybody here? Yes. James Lasbury from GTC. You've got to really swallow this one.
Right. So you talked about a huge growth there over the next 5 years.
Sure.
Can you give that a breakdown in terms of the annual growth rate, and then go into detail about what channels are going to be driving that growth across conversational commerce?
Sure. I think in terms of the annual growth rate, we will see, obviously I can't give too much away, but I think what we'll see is as technologies such as large language models come into play, that will actually see the annual growth rate accelerate through this period. So I think we'll expect to see somewhat slower growth to start with, and then that take off farther along as some of these new technological developments sort of come on stream. I think in terms of the channels, that's a difficult one to answer because it's very regionally dependent. I think we'll see different channels being popular in different regions and indeed different industries.
So maybe focus on the UK or Europe as a region.
Yeah, so I think within those particular markets, I think we will be looking more at elements such as SMS. We'll see a lot of those growth, but also web chatbots and those sort of mobile-enabled channels. But I think that's more sort of those channels focused than those OTT channels at this stage.
Thank you, James. Any more questions in the room? One more, Tim Ward, XConnect.
Thanks very much. Thank you for the introduction. I sometimes forget who I am. It's brilliant. You talked about voice almost as an underused channel there, and I'd just like to hear a little bit more about kind of what you may think are the reasons for that, why it's underused. It's kind of got the tradition. I mean, that's where an awful lot of our businesses come from. But clearly, you're making that observation. There's more opportunity to use it today.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. It's a really interesting area, this. So looking at voice, I think what we've seen is that what I spoke about is being important within conversational commerce is this seamless nature. And I think what we've seen in voice is that historically there's been a lack of the capability to actually make that seamless experience happen in the same way that a text-based chatbot or a different type of interaction can. I think there's a number of reasons for that, mostly technical. It's a lot easier to pull that off in that sort of text-based scenario. I think technological enablers are what is going to change that and what is going to enable a lot of greater access and innovation within the voice space, because you're going to be able to see voice bots and these different technologies being made much more effective by technologies such as large language models and natural language processing will make this whole process a bit more efficient. And that actually enables this to take a step forward and become much more valuable and more seamless for that end user. So I think we're seeing that technological shift, which is powering that opportunity that's emerging there.
And thank you. I mean, that kind of has a very interesting perspective in there in a technology enablement. And if I might offer a view of my own on this,
Sure.
So it was a slightly leading question, because I think so much of this comes down to the trust in a communication. And I'm still at that point where I get a voice call and I don't recognize that number. I just ignore it. I don't answer the damn thing. I'll leave it.
Yep.
I'll leave it alone. So
We've all been there.
We've all been there, absolutely. And I think the more we worry about these types of fraud we were talking about earlier on, the less trust we have in some of these communication channels. But I think the interesting thing about voice for me is that you do have an opportunity when you're actually talking to someone to establish trust by the way they talk and the things they talk about and the way they interact. And that seems to be, okay, you've got the first piece, which is answer the call. You've got the second piece is actually I can build trust through a conversation because you can actually demonstrate sort of common values and so on. So I do feel it's a vastly underused channel that has a real opportunity to build those personal trust relationships in a transaction.
Yeah.
Sure.
Got to cut you off on your prime, Mr. Ward, but there we are. But Nick, thank you so much indeed. We've got to, unfortunately, I'm sure they've got more questions, but we've got to continue. Gene, catch Nick in the break after, please. Thank you very much.
I was just going to say about speed.
Very quickly.
Yeah, we really, Gene Pratt, BTS. We didn't really talk about speed. How would you throw speed as one of the requirements within all the payment aspects that you pointed out?
I think speed is vitally important within payments. On the settlement side and from a technical perspective for merchants, then faster speed of settlement is always going to be preferable. I think from a consumer point of view, the important part is instant confirmation and ensuring that the details that are given around payments are very clear at that initial stage. Faster merchant settlement is very desirable as part of that as well. And that's a leading reason why we're seeing interest in things like instant payments, because they offer a much faster rate of merchant confirmation and faster access to funds. So I think that speed element is important, and that can be a downfall of some of those payment types as well. So I think that's an important one that we'll see sort of coming into focus going forward.
Yeah, it's the payout to the merchant, the speed that's conducted as well, not just how fast the client can conduct the payment.
Absolutely.
Okay, Nick, thank you so much indeed. Fantastic. Much appreciated. Don't leave me hanging. Don't leave me hanging. He left me.